Welcome to the final session of SmartLab Digital 2021. I'm thrilled to share with you today a very exciting debate among some of our leading industry experts. And we'll see how fiery today's debate gets, but I'm sure you can all agree with me that there is definitely a debate to be had around AI's utility in pharma labs. So before our speakers debate automation versus augmentation, just a very quick note for all of our audience members today. If you are joining us again for day 3 after the technical issues from day 1 and 2, you are absolute troopers. We apologize if you were one of the ones who were impacted by the technical issues, but if you missed any of the sessions from day 1 or 2 of SmartLab Digital, they are available to watch on demand. So just head over to the SmartLab agenda page to give them a watch following today's session. So for today's session, I just want to remind you as well that this is also interactive, so we truly welcome you to share your questions and comments with us at any time today via the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screens. So with those quick reminders out the way, I'd like to hand you over to our speakers to kick off the final session of SmartLab Digital 2021. Thanks, Célia.
Thank you, Millie. Hi, everyone. So I'm very pleased to moderate this session today, and let me briefly introduce the topic. We have all witnessed how the recent advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning changed the way we approach scientific research. And the lab of future is characterized by a fusion of the physical and digital world together in the research laboratory itself. Some manual processes have been replaced by automated one, reducing human errors and increasing productivity with automated liquid on-lead system, for example. While another side of AI consists in leveraging the human potential by augmenting its intelligence with digital tools such as smart glasses or voice assistant. And at LabTwin, we are building a voice assistant for scientists. We often reference to Jarvis, the artificial intelligence supporting Tony Stark in his research as the best example of a voice-forward lab assistant out there. But Christos mentioned to me rightfully that Jarvis illustrates also very well the automation side of the artificial intelligence when he is controlling autonomously the Mark 43 suit during combat. So I think it's a very good image to illustrate this debate today. We decided to explore this side of AI and reflect on their strengths and challenges in the shape of a debate. And it's our pleasure to welcome 2 experts in the field of automation and augmentation: Christos Varsakelis, team lead AI/ML at Janssen Pharmaceutical, and Mathew Devine, senior data scientist at Boehringer Ingelheim. So let's first start by briefly defining these 2 categories with our expert and their place in the lab. Christos, maybe you want to open up and define what is automation technology and how does it support scientific workflows?
Yep. Okay. Thanks very much for the introduction, Célia, and thanks for also bringing Jarvis into the equation. I think we can use this this analogy throughout this debate. So I think we can define an automated process as a process that it can be initiated by a human having a well-defined task, and then all the actions required to reach this task, including decision-making, are reserved for the machine. I think that's what defines particularly an automated process. We had a debate the other day whether high-throughput screening or a high-throughput machine is a part of an automated process. I think if the robot is able to pick the plates on its own and even run the experiments on its own and the road on its own, then we're talking of a very, very good example of an automated process. It's becoming more and more a part of bread and butter in labs, fully automated experimental procedures that help. It's basically for the development of faster timelines. And in cases where we could call it routine situations, that's where automation is really well. It works very well. Scalability here for me is the key.
Thank you, Christos. And Matt, would you doing the same for automation? What is it and how does it support scientific workflow in a nutshell?
Sure. Thank you, Célia, for the opportunity to discuss what augmentation is inside the laboratory. And so as Christos rightly pointed out, that automation is something that is done automatically. It can be started by the human, but all the decision making is done in an automated fashion. On the other hand, the augmentation in the laboratory is there to help the human and keeps the human in control at all times. And so if you want to think about use cases for this, it goes into something as simple as a calculator that you would have in the lab, or a hands-free assistant where the human is in control, asks questions and gets simple answers in response, or maybe it's just help with the laboratory annotation and so forth, and in hygiene conditions when they need to be preserved. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. So perfect. Now we align on what we're talking about, and let's get started with the debate. So a debate is by essence interactive, and I would encourage anyone to use the Q&A to send your questions or comments that you would have for our champion, and then there will be a Q&A section at the end of the debate. So let's get started. Christos, in your opinion, what are the advantages of automation technology over scientists' capabilities?
Timescales, complexity, and efficiency. So automation becomes really the way to go in cases where the complexity of the problem, also as a function of the timescales that you would like to execute it, are out of reach for a human mind. There are several examples for that. It doesn't mean that the human mind, if it didn't have an infinite amount of time, wouldn't do it. Everything is a function of time here. But if we're looking at being able to filter out, let's say, thousands of different variables, if you're looking at executing tasks at the level of a second or the level of a millisecond, and if you're looking at increasing efficiency at very, very limited timescales, then automation is it's the way to go. And as technology improves and trust is increased, machines are going to be endowed with more and more decision capabilities. So we will see that automation is going to play a bigger role in our lives. And I think a good example here, maybe a good example here comes not only from the lab, from the lab itself. So if you would like to replace, let's go again to high throughput screening or high throughput experimental devices. The whole breakthrough of the high throughput experimental device is exactly scalability. It's not that humans cannot do these experiments. Yes, they can. Just give me 100 of those people and I will do it. The thing is that this machine can do it more efficiently, faster, and probably also, I think, for surely cheaper, reaching the same amount of efficiency that a human would do.
Thank you. So yeah, really the efficiency and scalability of a technique, that would be the main advantages. And so maybe I'm bouncing back to Matt now. And so Matt, where do you see the limits then for automation and where augmented scientists have an advantage?
So I see the limits there, and basically in the rigidity of the automation. It's going to take time to set up an automation experiment, to have a high throughput system, and it's going to be usually limited to a certain set of tasks that are predefined. Now they can be scalable and they can be done cheaper, but that's only when you're locked into that one set of automations that you want to do. So at the end of the day, they are expensive with upfront investment that is required there to do it, and they'll pay out at the end. So this is one of the limitations that you have there. And another one is being rigid. There's no space to play. So if you have a scientist in the laboratory, then the human mind is quite plastic. Curiosity is not something that we're currently able to put into automation processes. Like I said, once you set it, you're pretty much in line with a certain set of experiments that you'll be able to perform. Yeah. And so I think, and that's about it.
Yeah, so the counter side would be to have more flexibility of the human over the machine. And so, Christos, what do you think about that? Do you think it's true? Do you think automation depends on our ability to map out all the possibility beforehand and then it cannot be flexible beyond that? Or or do you think that they can slowly evolve towards more human-like intelligence?
This is actually a very interesting point. I mean, when you're entering, let's say, a terra incognita, so an unknown land, that's where I think augmentation is more interesting at this point. We haven't yet developed the technologies to really explore something like that. On the other hand, the degree of the exhaustion of different scenarios is more or less like a fear of control that we have. And if we take, let's say, the example of autonomous cars, for instance, then the question is, are we as humans all the time prepared for every scenario that we're going to face down the road? No, obviously not. We have our judgment there at the moment it happens. One could actually use the same approach for an AI machine and say, if anything that you don't know appears, then judge. It is possible to do it. It's just we're not comfortable with that because we still want to be in control. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying. So from which point onwards, especially in really complicated stuff, we are ready to endow machines with fully decision capability. So where is the limit, I think, is a gray area. And it's really the most contentious topics. Because as we know, the more automated we become, the less FTs we need. So it's not only about money anymore. It's also it's a more complicated, it's a more complex game. Now, whether automation can lead us to serendipity, this is a very interesting question. And actually, one of the initial debates, Matt, I was wondering how you could do something like that. And I think it still is an open question. We haven't reached that point yet.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting because when we talk about automation or we talk about doing machine learning here at Boehringer Ingelheim, then there's always a lot of fear coming up that people's jobs will be replaced by the machine learning AI technology that we implement. And honestly, we're not that far to do it. And we're talking about a place where replacing these skills and this knowledge that people have here is not where we are at. Yeah, we're talking about just automating the simple things and leaving the more complex things up for our scientists in the laboratory and actually our lab technicians to figure out for themselves, to actually go beyond what they can do right now, just based upon the limitations that they have by not having the knowledge at their fingertips, for example.
I think you brought something interesting here. This is the augmentation versus disruption. And I think even if you're trying to augment people, they're afraid they're going to be disrupted in the end. Mm-hmm.
So Matt, to which extent do you think we can augment scientists, and what are the common use cases where you see that this augmentation really is beneficial?
Okay, yeah, so I kind of went over some of the use cases. So I've got a list here. I can go down them. So I said knowledge at the fingertips. You know, you think about an SOP. This is something that's traditionally inside of a laboratory for a scientist or a technician. They have it on the wall hanging. It should always be there, information at their fingertips. It's actually required by law, right? So we've got quality and compliance topics that come in there, which are really easy to fix with an augmentation assistant. Hey, can you give me the SOP for this chemical, or not the SOP for a chemical, but the safety data sheet, or can you give me the SOP for this particular experiment, and so on and so forth. Remind me, how much am I supposed to pipette, what's the dilution series, and so on and so forth. I did say like calculators, so we can talk about pre-programmed calculations that need to be done on the fly when scientists are at the bench and they want to perform dilution series, want to go over basically the SOP or the protocol for the particular experiment that they're going for. Did say something, you could think about this design of experiments too, like which, we did this, and we did this, and these are the outputs of that. Now tell me what's the next step and what's my parameter space look like? So this is another sort of field you think about using this augmented intelligence. Naturally, when there's hygienic conditions which are involved, and this prevents you from touching things, then naturally the voice activated is really nice. And I remember the quality control. So that being said, there are also, there's these limitations. You try to speak to Alexa or these voice-controlled systems, they don't understand you. They're not learning or adapting to the things that you say. I have a colleague, he wants the certain radio station to be played and always plays the wrong radio station because it doesn't understand him, and he's freaking out. Why can't I just get this thing to understand me? I ask for the radio station every day, and it's always misunderstanding me. Also, if you think about like this augmented reality, it starts to get into a place where it's too complicated, I think, for humans to comprehend, or we haven't come up with the right user interfaces, I would say, to maybe the right situations to actually use or put information which is useful to people in a high fidelity manner. I think at the moment, current ways of doing it are just, there's just too much information out there, and you need sort of like an aggregation function sort of in front. And I think this is where it kind of goes into automation. When you start thinking about condensing information, you need smart filters, but they come in and do this for you without having to ask for them specifically. So it's a huge frontier out there.
Yeah, and I was wondering also if this difference between automation and augmentation is also a difference of like speed and progress made into each sub part of the trend, because maybe we're also farther ahead with automation that we are with augmentation, where we start slowly only now finding a product that are actually adapted to what we want them to do. And of course, this understanding what we say, it's a challenge that at LabTwin we had from the beginning, understanding science. And of course, Siri or Alexa cannot do it, and you need a specialized digital assistant for scientists to be able to understand the scientific workflow. So I think there's also maybe more focus that need to be made on the augmentation to catch up with the advances in automation. Or what do you think about this?
What's the context? I mean, we're talking about the context. If you say it's the scientific context, then Siri was never programmed to understand science. It was programmed to understand maybe home automation or simple web queries that you would be making. And now we go somewhere else. And this is also the limitations of machine learning, artificial intelligence, is that these algorithms are only as smart as the data sets that they're being programmed with. And if you don't have the right data sets, let's call it experience, to feed these algorithms with, then you're not going to have the output that's desired.
So Christos, do you think now we have sufficient data sets to really take full advantage of the automation also? And that's why automation maybe is also a bit beyond what augmentation can do right now?
I think automation is in some steps ahead because it's not even depending on data. It's more like deterministic tasks. Mm-hmm. So that's there are a lot of things. And if you look, let's say, at the overall history of industrial revolutions, it is a history of automation, if you think of it. The overall, from the first to second to the third to the fourth industrial revolution, it is a sequence of automation, a sequence of changing the interaction between humans and machines becoming gradually more empowered. Now, talking about data, yeah, we are fully aware that our data are biased from our past. And that's not because our data are biased because, let's say, the guys who produced it were wrong or whatever. It's just anyone who was trying to measure something for a particular purpose. Now we're trying to make more generic purposes. And of course, we see in some cases it works, in other cases it doesn't work. But it will be very interesting to see if it's if some sort of AI algorithm asks you what sort of data to measure. That would be a totally different story. And that's actually, this is a front that a lot of companies are starting to face, that they're saying, okay, let's start almost from scratch and build exactly what we want, so as to reach, let's say, the level of accuracy.
To go more than in this design of the experiment based on the previous research that there is already.
Yeah, and it is the questions, exactly. It's exactly what you say. It's the design of experiments, and even more broadly, what are you trying to do? So in as much as we're calling it experience, in reality, you're just feeding questions and answers. That's it. And you're trying just to figure out the relation between figures and so if you don't having the right questions, you will never have the right answers. That's it.
So maybe you can interpolate, right? And I think that's kind of the idea. If you can kind of get around that space, and then the idea is hopefully somewhere in the middle is that question. Yeah, you've asked around, and maybe somewhere in the middle of the question is there.
Yeah, you're right. The problem is sometimes we're even in another room, not in the same room. So we've been measuring things, and in the end, 10 years later, we say, oh, that would be great to have that parameter, but it's never there. So
what I thought was interesting was that we were looking at algorithms which could create chemical substances based upon previous chemical substances. Right? So like, make me a new molecule, make me that next blockbuster drug, right? So this is, and it seems that like someone calculated it's like 10 to the 20, 10 to the 30 possible molecules out there.
10 to the 60, I think.
60?
10 to the 60, if I remember correctly, but we can...
okay, so that's even way far out there. That's like more stars in the universe. Yeah, it's just like incredibly insane. So, and when that's what it is, and you have a chemist, and the chemist has a job, and the chemist is a trained chemist, they have their experience from lots of years inside of the laboratory, and so then now you tell them, it's like, look, we got this algorithm, and why don't you try some of these chemicals this thing is producing? And rightfully so, they can ask, well, why should I do that? I mean, what is even the probability that this is something that's meaningful?
Well, I can tell you, the thing is that the probability of technical success in pharma is usually below 1%. So the benchmark is not that high, one could say.
Yeah.
But this is again about how to interpret the data, and where humans also have a small advance on machines still to interpret what makes sense, and not just trying every possible combination, let's say. So far, because of this constant need of flexibility, interpretation, decision making, automation is rather spread out into manufacturing labs where we have it a bit less, or let's say just small islands in the R&D labs or smaller labs. Do you see this segregation slowly disappearing in the future, or do you see that it's still to remain?
Christos?
Well, in general, there are fences and walls between R&D and manufacturing. We do know that. That would be a surprising turn of events if, let's say, manufacturing jumps into the technology faster, because manufacturing is always about stability. But if you want stability, and if you want to maintain, let's say, unperturbed supply chains, then you need to remove the human out of the equation as fast as possible. And that's it. It's very, very clear. So it will be a very interesting case where manufacturing is going to point towards R&D and say, we're actually more advanced than you. Maybe we should put the R&D in front of us. But for R&D, there is always the concept of, there will be, I think right now there is a dichotomy between automation and augmentation. And where we see the R, we're looking at augmentation. When we're seeing the D, we're looking at automation.
Matt, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this basically touches upon what I said at the beginning of this conversation, is that when you do this production, you've decided, you're locked and loaded, you're going for one thing, you have a deterministic output, and it's all about going to scale and things like this. And this is totally different scenario that you have inside of the laboratory, where you're trying things out and you're supposed to fail. You're supposed to, because if you don't fail, you're not learning, right?
Yeah, that's the point of R&D.
Depends who pays the bill. Right, Célia? Suppose that depends on who pays the bill in the end.
Well, hopefully the person who pays the bill understands a little bit about reality.
That's a big assumption, actually, that you're making here.
So there have been some attempts also to build some robot to design and realize directly the experiment in the lab. And so far they have been not totally successful. And that's why we still need really human in the R&D lab. And do you think that at one point we will reach out this level of a fully automated robot that in the R&D lab can handle on his own the experiment from the design to the execution? Or do you really think that it's this symbiotic relationship between the human and the machine that would prevail?
I would say currently, if you look at the state of, let's say, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data is king, right? And it's who has more data and the algorithms. And I think it's slowly transitioning. We have different things coming into play, like transfer learning. We have like who has the biggest or who has the most compute power is going to be king in the future. And there's lots of discussions. I mean, if you look at natural language processing and so on and so forth. But basically, when you ask me that question, I just think, well, what would the data set look like to train that algorithm? And it would basically be, well, give me a scientist and give me a scientist that has certain functions that can be performed and show me how these functions were performed in a successful operation. And yeah, that would be the data set. And I would say then you need to have lots and lots of that. And for me, it sounds pretty much almost impossible to realize in finite time.
Yeah, so that's also another use case is somehow of augmentation is like capturing the necessary data to train the models and choose these digital twin models that would be used afterwards for the next discovery.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So I want to keep time for the Q&A. So I will move forward because I think we reached a bit this point now where we understand that human and machines are bound to work hand in hand, and this for human they need a natural user interface to preserve the human quality, but also that is built to optimize the data exchange with the machine or the informatic systems. So I just want to briefly introduce that by developing a digital lab assistant at LabTwin, we are bringing augmentation in the lab with a user and data center approach. We are augmenting scientists by giving them hands-free access to databases and lab informatics system during their experiment execution, and streamlining also data collections through speech recognition and connected device to have this hands-free capacity and whenever you cannot touch or it's more a contamination issue. And we also augment the captured data with automatic structuring and metadata enrichment, because in the lab, the scientists are still the unique link right now between the different automated platform and the manual steps. And by capturing the context of the experiment, like we mentioned earlier, a digital lab assistant translates this link in digital data and facilitate further the data integration and the traceability between these different steps. So by giving the scientist a digital companion, we can take advantage of the scientist's flexibility while generating rich digital and structured data at the point of experimentation, as automation also would do. So now I want to open the floor for any questions. So maybe, Emily, you want to share the first question that came from our audience? And we take them one by one.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, guys, for that great debate. You were definitely, I think, fighting your corner each time. So I'm really interested to see what you guys all have to say about the questions coming in as well. So I'm going to kick off the question with our first one in the list about, and I'm going to come to you first, Célia, on this one about, because this is directly to do with, something LabTwin will be familiar with. But Has anyone tried using Alexa or Google Home for some lab work, and what kind of usage was that? Is it just for ordering supplies or something more? So I'll come to you first, Célia.
Yeah, so I mean, it has been started, of course, as soon as there was Lab Assistant for every user. Some really wanted to bring it to the lab to be able to just query any questions or just record some ideas or some note they want to do during the experiment. And they fast very realized that Alexa or Siri cannot understand science very well. And funny enough, when we build LabTwin, a consultant said, "Oh, it's like Alexa or Siri got a PhD suddenly," and that's what we're trying to do now. It's a voice assistant with a scientific PhD that can understand the scientists in the lab and then help with the process also, because the structure is made to collect scientific data, to organize it, and to interact with informatic systems.
Perfect, thank you. Christos, do you have anything to add to what Célia is saying, and have your own opinion on that? What about how to use kind of AI in the lab, as it were?
AI, sorry? Didn't hear you?
Or just following on from from what Célia was mentioning there on that question.
Google, you mean?
Yeah.
No, it's I will go back to Jarvis. Jarvis was built by Tony Stark, so he basically endowed you with the right data, right? But apparently Jarvis was built both with a PhD and with the capabilities of Alexa, so he could order whatever Tony wanted. It's a matter of it's a matter of targeting your audience. So if you're aiming and building an Alexa, let's say for a lab, you need to train it based on the right questions. I mean, you cannot ask it to cook you a carbonara. It would be nice, but probably it's not going to give anything. It's
definitely. Matt, I know we've gone through this question quite a bit, but do you have anything to add? I'd just like to come to you.
Well, yeah, I was surprised. I got a colleague of mine. He created an Alexa skill called Gene Teller. He has a publication on it in data and text mining, just kind of a short one. And he used it to ask for translations of gene names, for example, and just to look up information pretty simple about mouse and human genes. And it was quite interesting.
Cool, yeah.
But nothing intense, just very, narrow scope.
Yeah, definitely. Well, if we're able to, Matt, please share the publication with us, and we can share that with our attendees today if they're interested in hearing more about that. So quickly on to our next question then. Is anyone using tools like Stanford Design Thinking to analyze science problems? So I'm going to throw that out to the group if anyone is using that and what their thoughts are on that. Yeah, go for it, Matt.
Yeah, so, I mean, in the laboratory, I don't think anyone is necessarily doing design thinking. We do that at the BIX, the Digital Innovation Laboratory for Boehringer Ingelheim, where I work. We use a lot of that to come up with the sort of the concept behind the new tools that we want to develop. And so we've had scientists come from the laboratory, tell us their problems that we've had, and then we've gone into design thinking to make first prototypes for developing solutions.
Cool, very cool. Yep. Christos, do you have any comments to make on design thinking there? Do you know of any?
Yeah, design thinking, usually we have been using it also in my previous works both in the chemical and in the vaccines industry as part of bigger projects. So they require that they have multiple outputs, and as Matt said, a lot for prototyping. For pure blue sky thinking, I wouldn't tell it completely trial and error approach, but not that far from that. I mean, it's let's call it Bayesian trial and error approach. So clearly not design thinking. But that's really the way to go when you're going for prototyping, digital prototyping or platformization type of questions where you have multiple inputs. And it goes very well with Agile as well. Huh?
Yeah, definitely. Matt, you were just saying yes there and agreeing. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think when he says multiple inputs, I was just thinking it's like when you get multiple stakeholders together, multiple people, and they have lots of different ideas kind of all over the place, and you want to bring them together, kind of funnel the open space of ideas and then bring them down to one solution or one set of solutions. And yeah, it's been helpful.
Perfect. And Célia, from just LabTwin's perspective on that, do you see any kind of design thinking solutions or tools helping you on your side?
I mean, I'm not sure we call it design thinking, but what we've seen a lot actually is that by giving constantly a lab assistant to the scientists, they've been also registering the idea just at the point of experiment when they were realizing something or by doing something, or even sometimes just in the car going to work. And so it's also, by giving just the tool, you enhance this thinking ahead of an experiment.
Perfect, thank you. And coming to you again on this question, Célia, I think it'd be quite good for you to kick us off with an answer for this, but do you have any experience of artificial intelligence concerning raw data review in the lab in a GMP environment? And if yes, what was your feedback on this?
Yeah, so of course the review and the audit is always a challenge, and then the more you have high data quality, integrity, and completeness, the better you are off for this audit trail and traceability of the data. So this is something that we are totally supporting with also having a digital lab assistant, because we are able to constantly track protocol executions and associate directly all the metadata to each steps to be able to generate a report that retrace the user going through each workflow, with also timestamps and extra metadata that help a lot to support then the regulatory needs and the ALCOA principles.
Perfect, thank you. And Christos, what about yourself? Do you have any kind of feedback for scientists given the experience of artificial intelligence and raw data in this aspect?
Yeah, actually, if you look at, say, biopharma and in vaccines, and actually everywhere you have process development, where you're operating under the quality by design framework, you're living by the data quality standard. So, and if you want to use this data that come anywhere from any probe, let's say anything from anywhere from any sensor, and you want to use it to define controllers or digital twins that will directly go into as I said, a GXP or GMP environment. What we have been trying to do is to use artificial intelligence, or basically simplified algorithms, where you're trying to understand how the measured data, so the measured raw data, vary with respect to what you expect. This is not something new. People have been trying to do that since the 60s, and a very good example, basically also for the person who asked the question, is to review how NASA controlled the Apollo program. This is one of the first examples of a digital twins. Okay, there they didn't have an audit. Naturally, you couldn't do an audit in space, but it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same problem. It's like when you have raw data, how you can ensure the quality by employing usually some sort of Bayesian approach of what are your expectations and what you're getting. And it's a very cool feeling. In general, scientists are quite happy about it, because it's always a question to certify your data, let's say, and to know that what you're measuring is not bananas and is really something good.
Perfect. We have so many questions coming in, so I'm going to actually move on to the next one, and this one's for Matt, really. But our attendee has just asked, the use cases for augmentation mentioned today to improve the whole UX is really important, but automation has so much higher ROI, is what they're saying. What is your feedback on that kind of comment?
Yeah, it's. I think that this augmentation in the laboratory and also things like knowledge management systems, they kind of go hand in hand. If you're thinking about the lab notebook, it's actually very difficult to pin down the return on investment, because if you have an automation, then you can say something like, if we're able to having higher output from our experiments, then we can quantify exactly the amount of money that we're going to earn from that, because we know how much we can sell or what the raw materials cost. It's a formula, it's in an Excel sheet and so forth. And what you're talking about here in the augmentation side of things is improving the quality of your data, which is very difficult for even practitioners in data science to understand what that's supposed to mean for certain applications. It's going to improve the knowledge management, so hopefully the written record and the transferring of knowledge across the laboratory for different scientists and so forth. And this has typically been very difficult to assess what the return on investment should be right there. But I hope, everybody realizes that there's just like this, it's like the tip of the iceberg is kind of what we're looking at and seeing. And there's this huge unknown under the ocean, which needs to be tapped into.
Perfect, thank you. And Christos, I'm going to actually come to you, and Célia, feel free to add to what Christos has mentioned here, because I know that we spoke about it briefly offline, but what are your thoughts on the return on investment for automation as well, Christos?
I think when it goes to manufacturing, things are clearer there, always. Because if I can, let's say, improve my supply chain time from 3 months to 1 month, yeah, there it is. It's very, very simple. Now, in R&D, even with AI, you're using what we're calling a real option deployment. So basically, you're buying a promise. It's the same with augmentation. It's the same with any technology. You're buying a promise. You're paying upfront. It's like buying a talent, not buying. You're not buying a talent, but acquiring a talent in any kind of sport. You're paying upfront a big sum, and then you're expecting that at some point in the future, by training on their talent, they are going to pay off. Still, you should be able to at least do an order of magnitude analysis. So if I'm buying a tool, what I'm actually expecting out of it. So I'm expecting like increase in knowledge, I'm expecting increase in performance, in efficiency, development timelines. What is the overall strategy of the company? It's you can never separate a company from the dollar. That's it.
It's clear, yeah. Célia, what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with Christos or Matt there, or both, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question, so return on investment, because I think there's always a confusion between there is none and there is not one immediately that we know from the previous technology that we can apply to this one. And there's also with augmentation, the fact that it's something on the longer term, like Chris just mentioned, it's sometimes something that you find way farther away in the funnel of the knowledge. So, for example, we have an increase in data quality, but this is not always something that is very easy to measure. You can measure it in the reproducibility of experiment, but then you would need to really try it out to run the experiment in parallel with and without the technology, and then have somebody else repeating the same experiment with the documentation of the two experiments. And so this is usually like tests that are not made as a routine to try out the new technology, but that would be very interesting, because here we would really see an impact. And we have seen already increase in troubleshooting, how much faster it gets when you get the correct documentation. There is also all the question of compliance. If you increase compliance because you have a better data integrity or traceability, it's not directly a return on investment, but it's something that we do need to have, and it's also difficult to measure. But it's also a big impact, I think, on augmentation. There is an increase in efficiency. I think it's not comparable with automation, but it's also on tasks that you cannot compare. But there is a big time saved by the digitization steps, that you don't have to type your note from paper, for example, that you can directly have them digitalized. And this availability of the data in the correct format is what we will fuel later all the models and all the different lab informatics system, and then you would save time later on by having less to process and being able already to extract insight much faster from this data.
Perfect. Thank you. I love the detailed answer there. And Christos, this notion of Jarvis has really seemed to resonate with our audience today because we've actually got a question about it. But specifically to you, Christos, is someone's asked, would training Jarvis on all of published literature be a good start? It could do basic summarization, relationship extraction, build domain-specific knowledge graphs. Do you know of any works in this specific direction?
There are multiple works in this direction. Most of them, I wouldn't say they have failed spectacularly, but it's an extremely complicated problem. I mean, and the biggest problem is that we humans are not consistent. It's not the machine that it doesn't understand. At this point, if I go to the literature, I will probably find in 3 different fields at least 3 different papers almost at the same time rediscovering the same thing using a different language. That would kill a machine, basically. Or the machine would say, yeah, you guys are nuts. Like, I'm out of here. So it's one of the biggest, because this is, in a sense, is an NLP type of problem, right? It's the idea to decipher what our language says. And it is amazing because we have even managed to pollute mathematics, which is supposed to be a universal language. But it's a very big problem. So, but if somebody saves it, for sure they're gonna make like billions, if not trillions. Somebody who solves that problem, we're talking at the level of trillions of return on investment, because that would be extremely useful.
Yeah, definitely. So that's actually one for our audience there, straight from Christos. So for our final question of the day then, I just want to ask, it's a nice one to round up on actually, are pharma companies and EMEA being brave enough generally to embrace AI and automation in your opinion? So Matt, I'll come to you on this one and then we'll filter down.
Yes, they are, but it's unclear. It's an experiment right now. It's so brand new that the guidelines, they have to be created. Everyone has to agree on the guidelines. There's a notion of, at least for AI, the black box. It's a black box, right? So how do you make it transparent, or what steps do you take to show reproducibility in the results that you have? And I guess the EMEA there and the FDA, they're open. Right, they're open for this, but they need hard proof that it's actually consistent, reproducible, and explainability is a high priority.
Perfect, thank you. Christos, what about yourself? Do you agree?
For sure, there is a lot of investment. It's not entirely clear what let's say the long-term objective is, which is very interesting. It's like people have first thrown billions. Actually, if I remember correctly, the overall market was more than 20 billion in 2020. So they threw billions directly there, but the objectives are somewhat weird. It's like we want to go faster to market, but if you ask people how are you going to do it, it's still, we're going to figure it out. It is an interesting situation. It's not that they're not ready to do it, but then you have the change management because you're really now intruding. You're perceived as an intruder to traditional ways of working. And that's the biggest challenge that you have to face, if you ask me. They're going around the regulatory authorities is going to be like a walk in the park, comparing to convincing scientists that, look, that's the new ways of working. At least in my opinion. I found the FDA guys, and in general, much more reasonable with respect to the adoption of new technology.
You're laughing there, Matt. What are your thoughts? I'm sure everyone's interested to hear that.
Well, I mean, scientists are supposed to be critical. That's why they're scientists. And the guys at the FDA, they just want things to happen for the better. So they're optimists, but they also need to be critical enough to make sure everything's safe.
Nice answer there. Very diplomatic. And Célia, to round off, what are your thoughts from LabTwin?
Yeah, I mean, we are working with at least 7 of the top 20 pharma, and most of them are actually in Europe. So there's the big traction for encouraging this new technology in Europe already. And there is when we're based in Germany, so of course Germany has also a big program for artificial intelligence, and Switzerland also is very well ahead of all this innovation. So. I think we can be comfortable also with this topic in Europe, even though sure the regulation that make also our strengths in Europe are maybe a bit different than the FDA ones.
Perfect, thank you. And with that final answer, we sadly come to the very end of SmartLab Digital 21. So thank you to Célia, Christos and Matt for ending the event on such a high today, and also to LabTwin for sponsoring today's session as well. We've had some really fantastic insights shared throughout the course of this event. So this session in particular, along with some of our other sessions from day 1 and 2, will be available on demand. So just please do come back and revisit everything that was said here today and share it with your colleagues who are unable to join us. So thank you again for the very inspiring note that you have all left us on. I'd like to also say a personal thank you to my colleagues at PharmaIQ for helping and assisting me on this event over the past few weeks and in the lead up. We'll be back next year for the 5th edition. So we're interested to find out more, and we're excited for you to all rejoin us again. So one last thank you to everyone, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.